Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to disaster recovery, business continuity, COVID, resilience, anything that's relatable to those subjects, and anything that helps you, your organization, or your community plan and prepare for and get over adverse situations. Longtime listeners, especially on Voice America, will know that I was speaking at the BCI Virtual World Conference in 2020 in November. And for quite some time, I said, it was my hope that I could get to be able to interview and talk to some of the other speakers at that conference. Today is one of those days. The topic we're going to talk about today is organizational resilience within professional services, compliance in the supply chain. And I'd like to welcome to the show the speaker and presenter of that topic, Sarah Garrington. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. And it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Great. Now, we've got listeners and viewers, because we're on YouTube as well, so that are literally around the globe.
Yeah.
You take a minute or two and talk about yourself, what you do, and how you got into what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I currently work in a UK-based law firm. So I'm the business continuity manager for Irwin Mitchell. We have a number of offices up and down in the UK, and that includes kind of in Scotland. And we kind of deal with everything that you could need a lawyer for, we can provide in the UK. Prior to working for Irwin Mitchell, I actually worked for a bank in the UK as well. I got into operational resilience and business continuity purely by chance. I don't think that anyone I don't think anyone kind of when they're 8 years old goes, I want to be business continuity manager when I'm older. So I actually got into it when I used to work in facilities, and it was being kind of passed around like who's gonna write as a business continuity plan. And my manager at the time kind of went, oh, Sarah, that sounds like something you can do, right? So I bought the Business Continuity for Dummies book. I don't know whether you guys have that over the pond.
We do. I even have that book on my shelf.
Yeah, it's behind me. It reminds me where I came from. So yeah, I got that book, read it from cover to cover, and then just thought, let's get stuck in. So yeah, it's kind of really grown from there. Yeah, it's been a journey.
Oh yeah. I'm always amazed to hear how many people fell into it by accident. I really, it's so surprising.
I know.
Even though we call ourselves, an industry and we have standards and guidelines and ISO, BSI, DRI, and yet still so many of us fall into it by accident.
Absolutely. And I think that that's actually one of the challenges in our industry, in that, it's not kind of established yet to a point where people do think, oh yeah, when I'm older, that's what I want to do. And I think that there is a bit of an age gap actually. In BCI and the UK charters, a lot of the people that I engage with are, quite a lot older, and we don't have kind of as many people that are kind of in their 20s, fresh out of university. And I think it is going to be interesting to see where the industry goes for kind of those younger generations, because we need people to kind of come in and, give us a fresh kind of view, I think, as well.
Yeah, because some of us have been around for a while, and it's true. There aren't a lot of young people, but I enjoy talking to a lot of the younger people because they have fresh ideas. And, I've always wanted to make sure the industry has fresh and keeps changing and looks at different ways of doing things. Sometimes the old dogs don't like that, but it's like, oh, I do, I want to learn some of the things. So, and I talked to some recently, a gentleman in Italy who fell into it as well, but had a completely different way of thinking of how to do things. And I thought, that's what this industry needs. So
yeah, absolutely.
So, the generation gap it's there, whether anyone wants to admit it or not. But we're getting off topic. Sorry. It's so easy when I talk to people to get off topic, and we just go on a conversation. But back to your paper, or presentation, I should say.
Yeah.
organizational resilience within professional services, compliance in the supply chain. The
Yeah.
first part I do want to ask is, what do you mean by professional services industry? Who is that? What does that entail?
So for me, I would class anyone that's in professional services as, legal firms, consulting firms, businesses that kind of advisory firms go in and tell other businesses how they can kind of successfully do their job. I think it's an area that is often actually overlooked in business continuity terms, that I find you get a lot of papers, a lot of kind of documentation that's very focused on manufacturing and then very focused on finance. But then there's this huge kind of gap in the middle, that's this rafter of, industries that support the kind of, certainly the UK economy, many economies, and they need to be equally as resilient to kind of keep the cogs turning for the wider economy as well. So for me, it's, any of those advisory firms in the middle of that.
You brought up an interesting point. See, now we really are going off script. In your opinion, why do you think there is that gap? Why there is such a void? Because a lot of these industries focus on finance and manufacturing, and so many really aren't. Why do you think that gap exists?
Honestly, I think it's because it kind of goes to the point that we were talking about before, that I think it's, the industry really needs to kind of mature and become fully embedded in every organisation. I know that a challenge that I've had in previous organisations, where I was reading that BC for Dummies book, nobody had the time to speak to me because they, had clients to service, and they kind of went, it doesn't matter, because they don't have a regulator breathing down their neck saying, you have to have this. In manufacturing, it is their bread and butter. If something goes wrong, they can't complete their services. They can't kind of, build things for clients or customers, I should say. And I think that that's where that gap kind of comes from, that, you don't have, like I say, a regulator or somebody breathing down your neck saying, make sure you're resilient and prove to us that you are. And I think that that's where that kind of gap comes from.
Now, you talk about the supply chain management. Why is it important to know, why is it important to be aware of your supply chain?
So I think that that's, again, something that's hugely overlooked in a professional services environment, in that, we are all dependent on, not so much anymore, but, pieces of paper that come out of a printer, or getting certain documentation, or, there's this whole kind of rafter of things that we need to kind of, continue our business. And it's something we'll kind of come on to a little bit more, in a while, but the Financial Conduct Authority, their kind of papers, and the financial services regulators are really starting to ask the, UK financial services firms to start looking at their supply chain, because at the end of the day, it is, a whole kind of chain that does need to be resilient. You're only as resilient as your weakest link. And that kind of goes for outside of your business as well as inside of your business. So it's so important, I think, to kind of have that external view as well, and make sure that you are kind of looking at, all the people that provide your paper for you, or whatever it might be that's critical for your business. We've got to understand how resilient they are, because without that, you're, like I say, you're as resilient as the weakest link. So we need to kind of make sure that we understand that and we can address that risk.
You gave me another thought. Is it because some of these professional services, consulting firms and legal firms, et cetera, they're the ones who are helping these bigger companies with their supply chain, that finance and banks and manufacturing companies are looking at these places to help them with their supply chain, that it's kind of overlooked that legal services don't really have a quote supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's it goes back to that point about actually who has the time to speak to somebody about how resilient their paper provider is, using that example again. It's kind of, that's somebody else's job, but actually you kind of fall into that risk, don't you? It's always somebody else's job and never your job. And I just think that actually, without that kind of full understanding, how can we kind of guarantee that we are going to continue services to clients, continue, supporting financial services or manufacturers or whoever it might be, unless we can kind of hand on heart say, yeah, we've looked at this and we know that we're good.
I worked for one of those big consulting houses way back in Y2K era, and not once was there ever an internal view of our supply chain. It was always talking about our clients and what they were doing with Y2K and their suppliers and what partners, etc. And maybe it's difficult saying it, but maybe it's because those consulting houses, they're revenue driven.
Yeah.
So they're always looking at somebody else's stuff and not their own. But some of these consulting houses are huge. They should know their supply chain, and hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same that the professional services firm that I was working at, that was kind of one of those consulting businesses. When I started this kind of resilience journey in my career, I never looked at supply chain. I kind of was very focused on, how many laptops do we need? And if the building, goes up in flames, where am I going to put Joe Bloggs? I never actually looked wider than that. And I think that, partly that's me now learning and becoming kind of more mature and further in my career. But also I think it's kind of the view of the external, of the organisation, and, what's the big risk for them? What are they kind of concerned about? And sometimes it's really important to bring that to the table and actually show them what they should be concerned about, even if they haven't thought about it.
Well, I think that's good. The way you said the word maturity, and I guess once you have gone through a cycle or two for your organization, how many laptops you need, those kind of basics, then you can start looking further out. Otherwise, I guess maybe you run the risk of focusing so much on outside influences that if something happens, you're not prepared internally.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's all about kind of identifying the biggest risks for your business, but making sure that you're fully kind of aligned with every risk that could possibly happen, and then kind of choosing those that are most impactful. And I know that I'm sure a lot of people have been in this boat, that I had people laugh at me when I said, no, we need a pandemic as a trigger point on our crisis management plan. We need pandemic down there. And people kind of go, that never happened. That's low risk. Let's never prepare for that. And here we are.
Surprise, surprise.
Absolutely.
It's interesting that, even just a few years ago, everybody would say, we have to look at the scenarios and that could hit us. And now that word seems to have been crossed out with the 4-letter R word, risk, written in instead. No, just look at the risk, and impacts. Don't look at the scenario and how the scenario will play out.
Yeah. And I think it is a kind of interesting. I think it has its benefits looking at things that way, as well as its kind of, challenges. I think looking at things that way will kind of help as an organisation kind of look towards what are the kind of things that are going to impact you the most. Because as much as we are here to prepare the business for everything, if we can, there's no point kind of spending a lot of your time looking at something that's, very low probability, low impact, when actually you could have something like a pandemic and it might be kind of very low likelihood, but it's obviously got a huge impact, and it's kind of important, to make sure we are planning for those big impact events.
Well, now we need to jump back into your paper, because I know you went off there for a while, but it was all great information. So thank you very much. In your presentation, you talked about, and I want to get the words right, Financial Conduct Authority, FCA.
Yes.
Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so they're the one of the financial services regulators here in the UK. So they are one of the regulators that are kind of there for the big UK banks, telling them how they need to operate, and essentially removing their license to operate if they don't comply with the FCA, amongst kind of a couple of other regulators as well.
just to clarify, it's just for the UK, or are they a branch of something bigger, or they have their fingers into other nations and areas?
No, so it's what was the financial the FSA, which was a long time ago, where they are essentially kind of put in place by the government to kind of have that view and make sure that our kind of financial services are doing what they should, and acting ethically and doing the right thing just generally to protect the end kind of customer.
Just out of curiosity, because when I talk to people, I'm always thinking of other things. Are they involved with this new organizational resiliency initiative that's happening in the UK? Are they a part of that? Or
Yes,
are they the drivers of that?
Yeah, one of the drivers. So the FCA, the PRA, so Prudential Regulation Authority, and then the Bank of England, it was the three of them that really kind of drove this. It came from, there were a couple of kind of our big banks who suffered outages, and it kind of came from that actually they thought, we really need to kind of put a focus on this and make sure that we're driving from a regulatory point of view, making sure that they're kind of on it, and looking after, like I said, the end customer, and then the UK economy in general as well.
Okay, I thought so. It sounded like there was going to be some sort of a connection there. So
yeah,
I'm glad you confirmed that. Financial Conduct Authority. Now they published a paper. I believe it was in 2019, somewhere near the end of 2019, about some of the things that you already touched on. But what did that paper contain, and why was that paper even necessary?
So it was all driven on the back of, as I kind of said, a couple of kind of incidents that the big banks kind of suffered, where people were unable to access their money. It had a huge kind of impact on their kind of customer base. And so the three kind of regulatory authorities in the UK for financial services kind of thought, yeah, we're gonna put some regulatory kind of requirements around this. And on the back of that was this paper that's been released. So it's not made it into kind of formal policy statement just yet. That's kind of expected in the next couple of months. But the way that they like to do things is kind of give everyone a lot of warning that this is what's coming, and allow them to kind of start to prepare. And I know a lot of the kind of big banks, pension providers, insurers, people like that, they are actually starting to kind of get their ducks in a row to action what's in the paper. And what we've got is basically a view on how business is meant to kind of show they're operationally resilient. The crux of it is to identify single points of failure, and that can be at a process level internally, within their supply chain, or it could be, within a kind of change process as well. So if you're kind of doing a business change, whether that's an upgrade to an IT system, a change of process, whatever it might be, making sure that you're kind of resilient at every step of that kind of journey. The paper does kind of require banks, or anyone kind of regulated by the FCA, to start process mapping everything that they do, and start trying to identify those single points of failure and whether they can kind of recover that process within a set length of time. I think it's one of those kind of papers that it's asking quite a lot of businesses, but they've got a number of years to get it kind of in place. And like I said, it hasn't formally been released just yet, so there's a lot of time to get everything kind of lined up for it. But yeah, it's mainly identify single points of failure and either accept them as an accepted risk or address them.
I was speaking with someone else from the BCI conference, James Green, and he made reference to this organizational resiliency, FCA stuff, and he said it's 4 or 5 years that organizations will have to make sure they're compliant with this.
Yeah.
Roughly the kind of time frame, was he right?
Yeah, I think it's been, I mean, I've seen 3 years being bandied around, but it kind of depends on your kind of organization and what level you're regulated to. But yeah, it's a long time to get this stuff kind of in place. But to be honest, I think process mapping all of your client or customer facing activity is a huge undertaking, especially if businesses haven't got any of that in place. And you also need all the governance around it as well. So how are you going to accept it as a risk? How are you going to keep process maps up to date? Who's going to kind of decide whether or not it is a single point of failure and how you can recover it? There's a huge, the process mapping isn't kind of, the main event. It's kind of everything that goes around it that I think is going to take all the time to really kind of get right.
And then to put mitigation in place and make decisions, plans, alter arrangements, whatever the case may be, when you've identified those points of failure and risk pieces.
Absolutely. And, whether you want to kind of address them or not. So, if you do identify a single point of failure, if you want to address that, how does a business go about that amongst all the other things that businesses are, trying to do? Obviously, in the midst of dealing with a global pandemic as well, there's a lot of kind of business change happening right now for organizations. And I think prioritizing the single points of failure and addressing that risk is going to be something that organizations are going to have to think about quite hard. That's
a huge piece of scope.
Yeah.
The other piece with scope is who approves that final output. Is it the organization itself, or is it FCA who says, yeah, you've met everything?
So it's the organisation. So they kind of expect at a board level for you to have that kind of buy-in and for them to kind of say whether or not they're happy with the output. As with all of these things, the FCA kind of reserve the right to ask for your evidence and do spot checks essentially on how you're kind of keeping up with these things. But it is kind of up to the board of each organisation to accept those risks within their kind of current governance structure or seek to kind of invest and change those risks to reduce them.
Okay. So the next part that you talked about is, what do your client arrangements say? Now, what do you mean by that? Like service level agreements, that kind of thing, or?
Yeah, exactly. So, what do your contracts say? Do you have, so we're talking at a professional services level. If you are kind of providing a service to one of these financial services organisations that has to comply, how can you support them? There is a risk that if you don't have to comply as a business, but your clients do, that you could, lose that business if you're not compliant. And so I think one of the things that we really need to kind of make sure that we're kind of doing as a professional services industry is, tuning into those SLAs, contracts, just any kind of, arrangements that you have with your clients to make sure that if they're expecting you to comply with anything, that you're on the kind of front foot and that you actually are starting to kind of action these things.
Would you already have some of that anyway? When you have a contract, that has an SLA, only from my limited experience with being involved with some of those.
Yeah.
Don't you already have some of that in place? So what would be changing?
So I think it's really important to make sure that, the agreements are kind of kept up to date. But, you have a lot of businesses, I think, that do kind of, you've got a client that you've had for 20 years and that they're, almost part of the furniture now, but you just work together. And actually, does anyone ever look at the contract anymore? Does everyone, or is it kind of one of those things that people just go, that's just the way that things are done around here? And I think just kind of making sure that you've got your finger on the pulse and checking what you need to comply with, because there could just be some tiny little clause in there that just says, you need to support that client, with compliance with their regulatory requirements. And just that little clause could actually be the trigger point that means that you need to implement this whole paper, even though you don't need to comply with it yourself.
What other kind of things would you look at in a conference? Because I know you listed a few, contract elements.
Yeah, I think as well as kind of looking at the clauses for, how you need to kind of support your clients, I think it's really important to make sure that you're kind of looking at how you're meant to kind of communicate with them in any sort of crisis, or if there's any risk that you've identified. A lot of contracts will stipulate in there that, you know, you have to have a level of communication with them if you know something has gone wrong. And just, you know, making sure that you review that regularly. And if you do identify a single point of failure or identify a risk, make sure that you're kind of telling them to the level of your kind of contract that, you know, what that kind of stipulates. I also think that I'm personally somebody that believes in transparency generally. And I think that, you know, just having a conversation with your clients about the paper is a really important thing to do. If you don't have to comply, I think it shows that you're aware of their regulatory requirements and kind of how they need to operate their business. And I personally think that that kind of increases confidence in you, and, you know, that you're willing to kind of go the extra mile to support them. And I think that, you know, just having those conversations with clients is really important, just to kind of say, what do you expect from us? You know, you're implementing this, so how can we support you in that? And actually, you might find that it gives you actually a competitive gain or a competitive advantage, you know, amongst other kind of peers in the industry, because you're actively kind of trying to support your client. You know, and if you're part of a panel, for instance, it might be something that actually the client goes, nobody else asked us this question. You know, maybe we want to engage with this particular supplier a little bit more.
One of the items you listed there was fines and penalties. Now, I'm wondering, is that if you and I are doing business and I'm looking towards you, is it I'm fining you, or is it FCA fining you, or is it we both could be fined, you know, this amount if we're not compliant?
So it would be you fining me, essentially. You know, if I'm not compliant with the contract we have, you know, there could be kind of some sort of penalties in that, but also there could be anything that's kind of around, you know, the whole view that we have as a kind of business. In, like I said, what, you know, let's have that transparent conversation, because actually, you know, if you're feeling a bit begrudging, I suppose, of doing business with me in this example, you know, actually the smallest trip, and you could go, right, that's it, I'm slapping that penalty, you know, we're not paying for X, Y, and Z because you've breached your contract. And actually just having that kind of open, transparent, and friendly conversation with your clients, I think will really help businesses kind of avoid that.
Staying on the fines and penalties, if I don't have that conversation with you and I don't stipulate that, you know, there could be fines and penalties to you by not being compliant, I can get fined then by somebody, right? By FCA or some other entity?
Yeah, so you could get investigated, certainly, for non-compliance with your kind of regulatory requirements. I think there's also a piece around insurance in there. So actually, you know, if you were making a claim on your insurance for whatever reason, you know, actually whether you could prove via your insurer that actually that was down to my negligence. And if you could prove that, then it could be the insurers that come after me, you know, for your losses, essentially.
And if I don't do my due diligence, it's my negligence. You know,
Yeah,
I will suffer regardless of what you did. I didn't do what I should do, right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you didn't check me out close enough and make sure that I had my ducks in a row. So actually, yeah.
Okay. The next part, identify your approach and MI. What do you mean by approach, and what's MI?
So management information. So what are you providing to your board to give them the relevant kind of level of information that they need to identify these priorities? So when I'm talking about identifying your kind of approach, I'm kind of thinking about, you know, it's a huge undertaking, as we've said. There's a huge paper. There's lots to do, and I just find where you're going to start somewhere, because you're one kind of step forward if you just do something rather than sit there and think about it. So I think just kind of identifying your approach and making sure that you're kind of clear on all the steps that are, you know, required of you, and just making that kind of one step forward, just to say, you know, we've done something, we've ticked something off the list, I think is really important. I think as well, it's really important to just kind of make a start on something and then, you know, work out whether it's the right thing to do afterwards, or whether it needs tweaking. We've got the skeleton of what the kind of paper requires of businesses. So yeah, make a decision and start on something. And if you do need to fine tune it as kind of the policy statements released, or actually you just kind of get to grips with what you need to do a little bit more, then that's fine. I think we can all get paralyzed by kind of indecision, can't we? So make a step forward and then kind of see where you kind of end up, I think.
Who makes that decision? Because obviously this, you were speaking of business continuity, the conference.
Yeah.
And, there's still a lot of people who say, oh, it's the business continuity person who took care of this. So who really makes that decision of where we start and what approach to take, or who should be involved at least?
So that's at board level again. So, I think it's, absolutely, if that's in the remit of the business continuity manager or somebody else, fine. Make that proposal, because I don't think that the board's going to be able to do it completely by themselves. So propose a way forward, or even a few ways, and then just ask them to kind of make the decision. And at the end of the day, it's them that's got to kind of be accountable and responsible for it. So I think getting their buy-in at an early stage by asking them how they'd like to approach it is a positive thing.
And I assume, not just the board, but the executive team, the C-suite, I would assume they're involved and have some sort of say as well, because they're going to know what kind of, if the board turns around and says, this is what we want you to do, C-suite needs to say, well, then we're going to have to hire 20 people to do this, to meet your expectations and to comply, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's unfair to ask the board or even the C-suite to actually fully understand really the nitty-gritty. There's always going to be the doers and then the people that kind of, sit at that level. And I think it's unfair to ask somebody at a C-suite or board level to actually fully understand each of the processes and prioritize those. So I think it's kind of a bit of a joint effort, but certainly, go to that senior leadership level and get their buy-in and ask them to make those decisions. Like I said, whether it's to agree with a number of different proposals you have or one proposal, that's up to each business, but definitely get their buy-in for
that. Sarah, lots of great information. Let's continue talking about this paper and what it's looking for.
Yeah.
The next part is what business services are your clients going to ask you about?
Yeah, so I think if we're talking about, professional services organisations, as we said, you might not need to be compliant with the FCA paper, but your clients might be. So I think, like I said, it's a huge undertaking. So actually trying to prioritise the business processes that your clients will, need from you, I think is a great place to start, obviously. The sort of processes that you kind of provide to your clients, whether that's to support one of their kind of critical business processes, or if that's just something that, your clients are particularly interested in, the way you operate, I think is the brilliant first place to start. And, try and deal with the rest of it afterwards, but definitely prioritize those before you get into the nitty gritty of anything else.
Quick question. Can you leverage, if an organization has a traditional business impact and analysis, can you leverage that if it identifies all your processes?
Absolutely. So I think if you've already identified all of your processes and actually they are, in your view, kind of finalized, absolutely use those. There's no point, reinventing the wheel. So if you've kind of captured all of your processes and you kind of say, these are the ones that, service that particular client, then yeah, absolutely use that as your starting block. I think it's, there's no point making it more difficult than it needs to be. It's already going to be quite a chunky piece of work.
Yeah.
So let's keep it simple. If you've already got that information, use that and start from there.
Okay. The next part you touch on is identify your impact tolerances. Now there's always discussion about that. How do you determine your tolerance, high, medium, low? What does that mean? Because high, medium, low can be different for wherever you are in this process chain.
Yeah, so this is something that's actually, for the purposes of the paper, more closely aligned to your RTO of your kind of process. So the impact tolerance is kind of, what is your absolute tolerance for this process failing? And that could be the same as your RTO, or it actually could be longer than your RTO, because your RTO could be, blue sky, I want this process back in 8 hours. But actually, the business would fall over if it's not back in a day.
Sorry, I was just going to ask, is it the impact on me or the impact on the vendor, my supplier, or is it the impact if they have a situation and then the impact back on me? Or is it all of that, some combination of all of it?
It's pretty much all of it, to be honest. So it's, if we as a business had some disruption to this process, how long could we go, or how much impact could that have on us? And that could be impact to our clients, it could be impact to the UK economy, it could be impact to our colleagues and their health and safety, and how long or how much of that impact can we tolerate, basically, before it all goes kaput. It's kind of a mixture of all of those. But thinking more widely about, if you use a data breach as an example, if one of your processes went wrong, then you can say, I'll tolerate 2 records going awry, but actually by the time it gets to 10 records, then that's end of the game for us. It's kind of identifying, what does that impact mean and what does it look like based on the process.
Is that kind of a little bit scenario based though?
Yeah, so I think it can be scenario based. So you need to kind of make sure that in a range of scenarios, your process can continue. So like I said, whether it's a data breach, whether it's health and safety, whether it's just a client service, you just need to make sure that you, in a range of scenarios, can continue your process up to your impact tolerance.
Okay. Now you talked about this already, a process map. How do you go about creating that? What is that supposed to look like? Because I when I think of a process map, I think of Visio with boxes everywhere, lines everywhere that most people just can't read.
Yeah.
So how do you go about creating a process map that people can understand?
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult thing to actually do for businesses. Some people have got the luxury of a process team who do that. That's their bread and butter, and that's fantastic. Utilize those guys, because that's what they're there for. But like you said, other people don't. So I think I'm the same as you, that I'm a bit geeky. I love a Visio. It shows me exactly what I need to know, and I find it quite easy to kind of demonstrate to people. They say a picture says 1,000 words, and I find a Visio kind of has that effect for me. So I would encourage people to use Visios if you can. But actually sometimes just drawing some boxes on a Word document or a PowerPoint or whatever it might be, however it kind of works for your business, is absolutely fine, as long as you can kind of evidence that you've considered where your single points of failure lie, and then you are addressing those.
Would that be, and I'm not going to hold you to it, I'm not saying this is exactly your suggestion for everyone, but would you keep that kind of high level so that people can understand it without getting into all that minutia detail, that you see on Visio diagrams that come out of, IT, which have 1,000 boxes on it and lines you can't even follow after a point.
Yeah. So the way that I personally have been kind of addressing this is looking at the, all the kind of inputs to your process. So whether that's data information, whether that's IT systems, that's people, suppliers, all the different things that kind of feed into a process. And for me, it's kind of looking at where all those elements touch on the process. I like swim lanes on your Visios, because I think it's easier then to kind of see where it's going and whose responsibility it is.
I'm the same way. Give me a swim lane. It's easier to go through who gets what.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, also, you might find that some of your processes or some components are actually the same across multiple processes. So rather than kind of copy and paste the same bit over and over, I find it useful to just have a process map for that section and then reference it. And you're only then keeping the kind of bits that are individual to each process separate. And then I find that that's easier to follow. But you do need to make sure you've got a kind of good referencing and storage and a good kind of framework that sits around it. But you don't want to end up with, a piece of paper that's 10 miles long with all your different lines going across it, because you could end up with that.
Well, that's where the IT part comes in. You're doing the process, but you're not, and I hope I'm assuming correctly, you're not mapping out the IT network framework behind it, right?
No, right, yeah. So it's just the way that I'm addressing it is kind of saying, right, so I use Outlook for this, and it doesn't need to understand Exchange servers and data centers and all those things that sit behind it. It's just Outlook, so the kind of end user facing application, and then all the rest of it I think can kind of sit within a DR program or wherever in your business it sits. But yeah, not all the underlying infrastructure, just the end user facing application.
Now I know we've only got about 6 minutes left, but I do want to touch on this one.
Yeah.
Test to identify weaknesses. So I'm assuming you've got everything mapped out, you've had your meetings, people agreed this is our process.
Yeah.
How do you test it for weaknesses?
So that's where it comes to applying those scenarios. So the FCA is very much of the view that a failure will happen, not might happen. So prepare for everything that's kind of in your risk register and that's relevant to that process. So identifying weaknesses could be sitting down with the group of kind of people that do that process, and I think it's relevant to kind of have a cross section. So have your C-suite member, but then also have some kind of middle management, have some of the the doers, and make sure that if you say, okay, if I remove your Microsoft Outlook application, how are you going to get around that, and can you still service your clients to your impact tolerance? So it's almost like and be quite visual with it if you want to, taking a box away from your Visio and saying, right, I'm deleting that box. Now what do you do, and what does that look like?
And I assume you document findings and either contingency or mitigation plans.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and lessons learned, and making sure that if you kind of say, right, we can't continue this process without Outlook, make it, and we can't use the phone, we can't use anything else. Making sure that then you kind of move forward and seek the relevant investment, if you need to make sure that you've always got Outlook, or you've got a different kind of contingency. I think that's where getting that board buy-in comes into it, and making sure that they're kind of able to kind of see why investment needs to be made, if it needs to be made.
So after all of that, you started at the board, you go through all that you've done, you've tested, and you end up back at the board. And that actually brings us to the last point you had: communicate and embed, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So, communicate kind of across your business. So, yeah, like we said, having that kind of cross section of individuals, making sure that they're, comfortable that this is accurate. Somebody's got to take ownership, which I think is the embedding part. There's no point putting loads of effort into process mapping everything here in 2021. And then by 2023, actually, we don't do that anymore, or we've got a different system. You really need to stay on top of it. And communicating is both kind of internal within your board, your colleagues, etc., but also I think with your clients again. So going back to them and keeping them up to speed and saying, yeah, this is what we're looking at. This is how we're, doing operational resilience. Is that okay? Do you want anything else from us? Do you expect anything from us? And, closing that loop again to make sure that, you're allowing your clients to feed in. And they might want to see some lessons learned. They might want to kind of see, what you perceive your weaknesses to be. And I think, again, I'm quite transparent, but I think that's okay, because then, if it's something that's going to put you at risk of losing the contract, let them feed in. So actually you can say, yeah, we really need to address this, and again, seek that investment.
And you have to incorporate change as it occurs as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So whether that's like, business change and actually you're looking to do a system upgrade or, like I said earlier, change business process. But it could be external change factors as well. So, if actually your whole business goes into the cloud rather than a kind of on-premise physical data center, you need to make sure you're building that in and also thinking about resilience when you're starting these kind of changes. So, get your project manager in the room and kind of say, what are you doing? And making sure that you're kind of comfortable as the owner of the whole program, that what they're doing is going to make you more resilient and not put your business at risk.
Okay. We've got 2 minutes left. Do you have any, take a minute for any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just think it's really important, not only with this kind of paper, but just for businesses generally to make sure that they are thinking these things through. I've always felt, having a typical and old school business continuity plan, leaves so much room for improvement and so much more, like let's learn about the business and let's make it more resilient, just, wider than just having a piece of paper. And I think that this, regulation will really help businesses get there. And I think it's actually the way that the industry is going. And I think that's a really positive thing.
Great. Well, thank you very much for sharing your expertise and time. I know this paper has been referenced a couple of times now with people that I've spoken to. So
Yeah,
I'm sure this is going to have a big impact on the industry as we go forward. And just like some other regulations that come out, ISO or whatever, I think it's going to probably have an impact outside of the UK as well. I think other organizations are going to take a look at this that are based in, the EU or, here in Canada or the US or beyond. I've got a feeling it's going to have a much further reach than just the UK.
I agree. And I think it's a good thing, but I'm biased.
Yeah. Well, thank you once again, and congratulations on your presentation at BCI Virtual World. And to everybody watching and listening, stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.